Well, you can't trust County.
I was teasing to you earlier this week when you asked me what case I was going to cover, and this story creepers sort of feels like, in the weirdest of ways, the next chapter to the Christian Andriacchio story, which I think when this episode comes out, you'll have covered maybe like 2 weeks prior.
Yes.
So there's a little bit of a grace period in between, but yeah, there's so many
Interesting.
weird parallels with it because not only does it involve sort of a love triangle, but there's some infidelity, there's even kidnapping, and it also takes place in a southern coastal town. I guess you could call it the deep south, kind of like Christian, but it takes place in Florida, which I don't know if Florida quite qualifies as the deep
Well,
south.
I mean, you would be a better judge than I would, but Florida is its own thing outside of the South.
I know. I think I've made my opinion known on another case that's going to be coming out in March. If you remember the Florida case that we covered.
Oh, just about how like Florida is
Yeah.
not quite like in the same pocket of the South. Well, a
Yeah.
lot of Floridians are like transplants. Like they weren't like
Yeah.
born in Florida, which is why I think.
Yeah. But I think what makes this case so compelling is that it starts out with a fairly simple story and timeline to follow. And by all accounts, I think this is one of those cases where the perpetrators could have easily flown under the radar for a long time had certain people not pressed harder and harder for more information. And it just reminded me that what we do here when we in the Creepers really press and we share these stories, we really do support the efforts of these families and the friends of the victims that aren't heard by law enforcement who are, told to be quiet or even worse. And we'll get to it in
Mhm.
this case called crazy. So just remembering we can give a voice to the voiceless and kind of act as a megaphone on this platform. Like, obviously on a podcast, you've got a pretty big platform, but just sharing these stories on Reddit, I mean, it can do wonders. Because we're going to
Mhm.
find out at the end of this case, had that not happened, we might not have seen a resolution that came 17 years later. We're going to
Ooh.
discover one insane, cold hard truth about the tragic death of a man named Mike Williams, located in Lake Seminole, Florida. And like I said, it comes 17 years after his initial disappearance. But
Interesting.
have you heard of this case ever?
No, I don't think so. You said Lake Seminole?
Lake Seminole. And I guess I should clarify, the town isn't Lake Seminole, but the town is called Seminole, Florida. But this all takes
I have
place
no idea where that is.
on the lake. I guess it's pretty far. I have no idea where that is.
I have no idea where that is. You go, it's on the lake. And I was like, where's
It's
my
on a
notepad?
lake. We'll get into it, but I think it's like 20 miles outside of Tampa.
Okay. Okay.
You're like, I still don't know where that is.
I'm like, Tampa.
Tampa. Have you been to Tampa?
No.
Have you been to Florida, honey?
Yes, I've been to
Okay.
Disney World, which I know
I'm
is
like,
its own thing.
I
Tampa's like north west kind of Florida, or like centrally.
I think you're like northwest, central, south joggers. I
Stop.
believe. Let me look it up. I think Lake Seminole is on. Because here's the thing with Florida. It's like, are you on the west coast of Florida or the east coast? And I believe this is on the west coast of Florida.
I was pretty sure Tampa's like not. It's somewhere on the northern side of Florida because I remember like loosely planning maybe a road trip that would pass through Tampa, and I would not have put that there unless it
Yeah.
was like towards the top part of the state, so I wouldn't have to dip too deep into Florida and
Yeah.
then come back up.
Yeah. Okay, I think it is on the west side, but it's like right on the Florida-Georgia line.
Okay.
So I guess it's actually pretty far north. North, south, east, west.
Oh,
But now that we got our bearings, let me just
Mhm.
say, welcome back, Creepers, to another Friday episode of CreepTime, the podcast. If you are new here, we're so happy you found us, babies. I am one of your hosts. I'm Stu, and I'm accompanied by the lovely Silas Dean. And we're going to be gosh, I mean, right now we're just 2 weeks away from our tour,
Mhm.
which is just insane. So you've already gotten your tickets at creeptime.com. We are so, so thankful that we're gonna be able to get to meet some of y'all in just a few short weeks. I mean, this is so crazy that it's
Oh,
so
actually,
close.
now that you're mentioning it, I do have something here to my right.
Yeah.
I have a little friend to show you.
Wait, stop.
I was like, well, you've already seen this, but the creepers may not have. For anybody who is considering to come out to one of the live shows, of course, we will have merch there. There are things you can buy. We do have a new item that is exclusive to
Yes.
just Creep Time Live. You can only get this if you're there in person. This is a friend of mine. She's very sleepy, as you can tell.
Maybe she's cozy too. I'm just blown out.
So it's for anyone who's not watching, I pity thee. But for anyone who is, this is a mannequin with a fresh silk style sleep mask on that reads "blown out."
Blown the hell out.
This is a Creep Time Live exclusive merch item. You can only get this in person at the live shows. So again, head over to creeptime.com and get those tickets now so you can get your sleep
Yes.
mask
Oh
because
my
we're all a
god.
little blown out and we need some shut eye.
Just know you're gonna be driving one day, and I'm gonna fall asleep with that on in the passenger seat.
I'm about to fly to DC. What do you think I'm going to wear on the plane?
You better. You better. Oh my god. Yeah, so Creepers, we're so excited to see some of y'all on tour, and my god, we're gonna give y'all one hell of a show, but for those of you that are maybe, in different parts of the country, not out west, if you want us to come to your city, make sure you go to creeptime.com and you get to request your city there because hopefully we can make our way to you someday. And I'll also just say if you are new here, make sure to follow us on Spotify or Apple so you don't miss any new episodes. And if you really like us, go ahead and leave us a review. And you can do that on Spotify and Apple. You can also comment on Spotify, which is super fun. We get to interact with you that way. And yeah, I think that's about it. So the admin up front,
Pretty much.
pretty much. And I guess maybe we can just get into it.
Take the lead.
Okay. So this case takes place, like I said, in Seminole, Florida, which is just about an hour outside of Tallahassee, baby. Also, like I said, I think it's about 20 miles outside of Tampa, but it all begins on a December morning in the year 2000, and it will actually take place on the lake, which is pretty
Mhm.
sizable from what I read. It's a really good lake for fishing, but it's also a pretty dangerous lake. It's got
Oh,
alligators in it, which is of course pretty normal for this area of Florida.
Christ. My
I know.
God.
Well, get ready because it plays a part in this case. And I also read it has quite a bit of activity on like one particular side of it. There's apparently a park nearby, so this is a type of lake where a lot of people go jet skiing and water skiing in the summer. I
Mhm.
guess hopefully on the side that's clear of the alligators.
I was gonna say, it was like does seem like a very drastic design flaw to put a public park next to an alligator-infested
I
lake, but I
know. I
suppose
read
that
that.
is
I
Florida.
know. I know. I was like, I guess there's just sections of it where they don't really inhabit.
It's
But I
probably
think
fenced off or something maybe? I don't
yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah. And I do have a picture. I won't tell you to go to it just yet, but I will have a picture of kind of what that lake looks like in the Canva doc. Which creepers will have that up on Reddit like we always do. Um, but you will see a picture of it in a little bit. But
Mm.
for Mike Williams, who this case centers around, it was one of his favorite places to go duck hunting in the winter and fishing in the summer. And Mike was an avid outdoorsman. Hunting and fishing in the morning was very therapeutic for him. And just kind of being out on that lake kind of put him at ease. And from the pictures of it, you'll probably see why. I mean, it's got lots of trees that sort of overhang, lots of like larger oak trees. It sort of reminds me of like that scene in the Notebook where they're like rowing.
Mm.
It's very pretty. It's got like lots of Spanish moss and in most mornings in the wintertime, Mike would go out there super early to go duck hunting. And this December morning was one of those mornings. So, in the early hours of December 16th, 2000, 31-year-old Mike leaves the home that he shares with his wife, Denise, and his daughter, Ansley, who you'll probably see a picture of on that first page.
Yeah, on the
Um,
bottom right, yeah.
yeah. And any just like first reactions from how they look as a family?
Not really, to be honest. They look very normal. I mean, maybe he looks a bit older than 31 in my eyes, but I was just talking about this last night with Jen and Candace,
Yeah.
how, like, 30 and 40 look very different than they did back in, like, the 90s, like, what
Yeah.
30 and 40 looked like, so you did say this was 2000, so I don't know.
Yeah. This was 2000. Yeah, he I kind of had the same thought, but they do have that kind of classic cookie cutter looking family, that we see so often in some of these cases. But, um, yeah, so they lived together in a really nice home, located about an hour away. And, this I guess I don't know what the exact town was, but where they lived was right outside of Tallahassee. But he would do these duck hunting trips a lot. He would wake up super early and then go fish or hunt on a Saturday morning, which this took place on a Saturday, and he'd usually come back home by mid-morning. But this wasn't just an ordinary day, it was actually the day of, his 6th wedding anniversary to Denise. So
Mm.
he and Denise had plans that after he did his duck hunting trip, he would return home, and then the 2 of them would make another drive out to a town called Floridian creepers don't kill me, Apachicola? Apachicola. Apachicola, which is about 2 hours away, and they were gonna stay.
Wait, can I look at the spelling of that? Where is
It's
that?
literally all I wanna say is Appalachia. It's APA
Appa
chic
Apacheek?
cola, Apachicola,
It's
Apach
gotta be that, Appichicola.
Appachicola. And Appachicola is about 2 hours away, and they were gonna stay in a bed and breakfast and just have, like a
Mhm.
romantic wedding anniversary weekend away together.
Cute. Okay.
Cute. But at
I
around
think it is.
I know, I'm gonna say cute, and then in the context of this case, you're gonna be like, "Eh, what time is
Let
it?"
me oh god, no,
Shoot.
like, I'm not even looking at
Oh
it.
god. Oh
12:57. Let me
god,
mark that down. Hold
12:57.
on.
Oh god. And so at around noon that day, Mike hadn't returned, and that was very unusual, and his wife thought it was, of course, unusual for him to be gone this long, but especially on such a special day when they had plans to drive out that afternoon. So she ends up calling her brother-in-law, Mike's brother, Nick, and told him, "Something seems really weird about this. Has he contacted you yet?" And Nick says no. So Nick ends up notifying police that his brother was missing, and the next day informal sort of investigation began on this 30,000 acre lake. And
Hmm.
in particular, there was one friend of Mike's that ended up being pretty helpful at the beginning of all this. He and Mike had been longtime friends all the way back from high school, and they hunted a lot and fished together on this lake. And knowing it well, he was contacted pretty early on and arrived quickly to assist with that search. And shortly thereafter, about 10 days into the search, officers ended up finding a hunting hat that was floating out on the water.
Oh,
And this
no.
friend, his name was Brian Winchester, thought that the hat looked like one he had seen Mike wear a couple of years before, but on a hunting trip that they took together.
Mm.
And so he ends up finding a photograph of them on that trip, and it's a match with that hat. And police are thinking, oh God, there's probably a body somewhere in these waters.
Yeah.
Terrible. And Brian ended up being instrumental in the search. He arrived to the days of searches early and he stayed late during much of the first couple of weeks of that investigation. And he plays an important role in not only confirming that hat discovery, but he also makes another major discovery in the investigation because Brian was the first person to actually corroborate the spotting of Mike's boat from a helicopter that was flying overhead in January of 2001,
Whoa.
which is crazy to me that this helicopter just happened. I get this had a lot of media coverage at the time, so I guess they happened to spot a random boat that was out on the water with nobody in it and called it in. And Brian was the one that said, "Yep, this is Mike's boat."
Mm.
So very lucky that that helicopter happened to be flying by. Um, I should also mention up until this point, they had only ever found Mike's Ford Bronco, which had been parked outside of the entrance to the lake where the boat ramp is. So
Mhm.
finding the boat was going to be a major discovery. And Brian, who of course had been in that boat plenty of times, noticed that when they did find the boat, all of Mike's duck decoys were still in it, which if you
Mhm.
don't know anything about duck hunting, duck decoys are basically placed out into the water in order to attract like passing ducks that are flying by because they'll think, oh, it's like another little pocket, little community of ducks. And Brian said the fact that none of these are out of the boat and this looks like about the count that he normally would have before he started, I don't think he ever got started hunting that day. So just
Hmm.
lots of weird circumstances. And at this point, police and the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, the FFWCC, who were pretty instrumental
Ooh.
in this investigation, are starting to think, maybe Mike accidentally fell out of the boat and hit his head, or just something must have happened early on in that morning that, could there have been something in these waters that could have, potentially harmed him.
Yeah, or
Um,
two things could be true. He fell out of
yeah.
the boat and then something got him.
Yeah, exactly, and I was just reading, I was, like, wondering how deep this lake is, and it varies, but apparently before the lake had ever become a lake, it had been flooded, it was an orchard, so there's, like,
Oh.
lots of tree stumps, I guess, still in the water, so initially they thought, "Oh god, if he fell overboard, there's a chance that first, I guess he could have hit his boat into a tree stump, and that could have knocked him out, or,
Mhm.
um he just happened to fall out of the boat at some point and then hit his head on a tree stump. They weren't quite sure. Um, but the only logical thought at this point, and they feel pretty confident, is that his body is going to surface at some point. And Brian even says to Mike's friend and his boss at the time, who was helping out with the search, I don't want to be here when they find Mike. So pretty sad and ominous circumstances at first.
Mhm.
And the other theory that police had come up with, Mike had been wearing waders, which most duck hunters wear. Do you know what waders are?
Like, you're talking, like, body weights or something, or is that
Th-
something else?
They're kind of waders are like the best way I can describe them is like super tall boots that kind of almost go all the way up to your waist. But I
Oh,
guess so you can.
so when you say he's, like, hunting, he's, like, boots on the ground in the water kinda thing.
He could be to get like a better stance.
Got it. Okay, yeah, I was trying to get a visual of, like, how deep the water is, but it sounds like at least the portions he was in I've definitely seen imagery of this, of guys that wear this when they hunt, so it's barely even, like, waist deep that he's in,
Yeah. Well,
maybe.
and I'm sure he could go out to, like, certain parts that were a lot deeper, but
Mhm.
I think for the most part, like, where ducks normally are, they're gonna be, like, over by the shore, so he could get out if he
Mm.
needed to. But yeah, this is a theory that police come up with. They say, he could have been wearing waders, which is almost like wearing bricks around your legs, and had he gotten out of the boat, could those have filled up and he just couldn't move and he drowned?
My
And
god.
then there was this third component, which we already kind of touched on, but these are alligator infested waters. And could Mike have possibly been attacked and eaten by an alligator? So, of course, these are all horrible ways to die, but these are the only theories that they're able to really pull together at this point. But here's something kind of interesting that the fish and wildlife officers pointed out to police. They said for him to die by an alligator attack would actually be pretty unusual because during the
Mm.
winter, there's actually this kind of fascinating to me, but I guess with really cold temperatures, alligators go into a sort of hibernation. And
Synchronicity. I just
oh,
watched a TikTok about this.
no way,
Yeah,
really?
yeah, yeah. I saw it 'cause somebody was showing a picture where they'll, like, I don't know if it's called their snout, but the end of their very long
Yeah.
face, they will put the nostrils up to the surface in the water, so if they're in a place where the water freezes near the edge, their whole body will just go static, and they'll just kind of vegetate in that place, hibernate, I guess,
Oh my
for, like,
God.
a period of time.
You
It's
could
so
get a
weird you're
job with
bringing
the
this
Fish
up.
and Wildlife Commission if all
Maybe
this
the
goes
application
to
is in
hell.
tonight. Tonight.
That is so funny. Yeah, I don't know if the TikTok said anything, but, alligators also their metabolism just slows down so much, and
Mhm.
they just don't have much of an appetite when they're super cold. So, they go to police and say,
Not my
"That's it."
experience, but that's fine, but
They
I was
I
like,
know, I
"Can't
wish that
relate to
was the
you at
case.
all,
I'm like,
alligator," but
I know. When it's cold outside, I'm like, all I wanna do is eat. But
precisely.
but they say, this we good idea, but we really don't think that this is the case.
Mm.
Now, months would pass, and it wouldn't be until June of 2001 that another item of Mike's would surface, and this was a pretty huge moment. They were Mike's waders. They had been found in the
Mm.
lake by a fisherman, and what was immediately interesting was that these waders were completely clean. There was no algae on them. There was no potential bite marks from alligators or anything like that.
Mm-mm-mm.
And Also, like, no indication of, human remains near them whatsoever. It was just sorta like his body had slipped out of the waders, which of course is possible, but for them to be found almost completely untouched was sign number 1 that we're potentially dealing with something darker here.
Yeah, no algae. I was sold at no algae. I was like, those
I
went
know,
in the water after
I know.
anything happened.
I was sold at no algae too because I don't know if I've told you this, but I used to work for a pond company.
Up what?
Did I ever tell you this? One of my first jobs
Like
working at a
pawn as in
ponds, Pond, honey, where I
oh,
had I had to sell products that would get rid of algae. So, that for me, I was like, "Something ain't right." Not the algae.
no, certainly something is sour in that buttermilk, honey. No.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, yeah, so that's super weird, and, of course, though, they still have no body, and the wildlife and fishing officers were really the ones that were sort of in charge of keeping this investigation alive at this point, and they're just stumped as to what could have happened. So, they actually after this discovery is made, they say, "Oh, something is not right here," and they're like, "This is kind of above our pay grade," and they toss it back to county police again, feeling like it's gonna be a little bit over their heads. So,
Mhm.
I'm just gonna pause there and, like, get your thoughts on that initial setup, and if you if you sense that if this is gonna go in a darker direction, like, do you have any sort of feeling thus far?
I certainly do, but only because you've mentioned some of, like, the things that were found with, like, a good amount of time in between each thing, and they're kind of found in different locations, but specifically an item found in the water that presumably had been in the water for as long as he had been missing, that has really no buildup or algae on it, that I can just tell you from previous cases you and I have looked at,
Yeah.
that's a sign that that item entered the water possibly at a later date.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Super, super weird. This case has just, like, a very different vibe to me. I don't know why. I guess I was trying to think if we've ever covered a case where,
With
like,
gators.
bodies
No.
yeah, gators. Yeah, truly, I'm like, "Gators." This is I feel like very, like, county police coded. It's, like, very Southern, but, yeah, I was trying to think if we've ever had a case where, like, someone, like, went out into the water and then was never found again, but I guess there's a
That's a
lot of
good point.
cases.
That's a good point. I can't really think of anything. A lot of our cases I feel like don't have to do very much with people who are found in the water. The only one that's coming to mind is Kylie Rodney, but hers is obviously a
Yeah.
different scenario because her car went in the water. This is different. This is someone who went on a really like a hunting slash fishing kind of excursion in a boat.
Yeah, and actually, it's dawning on me now that when I was doing the research, I didn't see anything about, like, divers. There's, like, those vigilante diver groups that go in and try to maybe because it was just earlier, like, in the 2000s, and some of those groups weren't formed yet or the technology wasn't as great as it is today, but,
Maybe, yeah.
yeah, I
Or
didn't
is
see
it safe to dive into these waters to
I was
search?
gonna say maybe it's not. Maybe because of the gators, that was kind of part of the reason why, but um, yeah, I was just thinking, I didn't see anything in the research about them doing any sort of like the sonar stuff like we see a lot of times with those cases like a Kylie Rodney or
Yeah, I thought
um
that too while you were saying it, but I wondered if maybe it had to do with like what's in the water, why they're not
yeah,
going in it.
yeah. So let's move away from the water and let's break down, I think, what's a little bit more juicy, a little bit more of Mike's background and his relationship with his wife, Denise, and actually his relationship with his best friend that I just talked about a little bit, Brian, and also Brian's wife, Kathy. So if you can imagine it, Mike and Denise were high school sweethearts. But like I mentioned, Brian had also gone to school with Mike and also Denise. They had all been longtime friends all the way back from high school. I think Kathy actually came into the picture a little bit later, but these two couples were very, very close. And Mike and Denise were also your classic all American high school couple. He was a football player, she was homecoming queen and a cheerleader. And Denise was apparently lovely, like a very bubbly, likable person, and also very devout in her Christian faith. Actually, both of them were. Actually, both couples were. Now, this high school where they all met was actually a private Christian high school, and then she and Mike ended up following each other to Florida State University and got
Mhm.
married shortly thereafter. So, a very wholesome story, but I do just want to call that out that they had known each other for a very long time and they had known Brian for a very long time.
Okay.
And they ended up having one daughter together named Ansley. And Mike had a very successful career in real estate appraisal. And I read that Mike would work like 14 to 15-hour days most days. But he always made sure to get to like his daughter's recitals or her events. He just like really prioritized family. And I saw a couple interviews where his coworkers were just saying like Mike was Mr. Mom. He was like the guy that you wanted to be married to, just super likable and a wonderful family man, which of course made his disappearance even more sad. And he was leaving behind, this wife and daughter to sort of fend for themselves. And I also just want to mention that Brian's wife, Kathy, was super close with Denise. They were also best friends. And I was reading that after Mike passed away, Kathy was really there for Denise. She would actually drive her down to Lake Seminole pretty often, and Denise would leave flowers and notes to
Mm.
Mike, even though he wasn't officially pronounced dead yet. That would just come a couple of months after the discovery with those waiters. But after his death certificate was officially issued, Denise decided to, kind of accept the fact that Mike was gone and she
Mhm.
files claims on Mike's life insurance policy. And actually, Brian Winchester happened to be Mike's insurance broker, which was helpful because she just felt like she had a family friend to rely on when figuring out how to file these claims and kind of get her and Ansley up and running and starting their lives again. She was reportedly just like very frazzled, obviously, by this whole situation. Now, it all kind of sounds like it might stop here, that they have issued the death certificate and that it's all going to get chalked up to this, tragic boating accident. But that is not at all where this case ends because, like I said in the top line, there are certain people that when they think something is off, are going to speak up and hammer that home that really something ain't right. And in this case, and I wrote this in my research, and I know I used this recently with you. I like said this about you, and I hope you know it's the biggest compliment in my opinion. But I said somebody they're like a dog with a bone, like they're not going to let go. I think I said that about you being a child star agent, but
Wait, wait. I'm sorry. You lost me on the context of that. Wait, me being a child star agent and I'm a dog
dude,
with a bone.
you're a dog
I
with a
d-
bone. Like I know you would go to bat for that child star. You would be wheeling and
Oh,
dealing.
gotcha. Like I'm in the room with Nickelodeon and I'm
Yeah.
like redlining a contract like you would not believe. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, but I think I said it the other day. I was like, "You were like a dog with a bone," and I don't even think the phrase initially clocked for you, but I just wanna let you know that it's such a compliment, especially in this case, because I'm using it in the context of talking about Mike's mom, Cheryl Williams, and actually,
Mm,
I'm just gonna let
not
you
who I thought
go
you were gonna
ahead.
mention. I thought you were gonna mention the brother.
No, it's actually his mom, and
Interesting.
I'm
Okay.
realizing now, I'm like, I want you to see a picture of her, but she's on a page in that doc where I don't want you to look just yet.
It's okay. I clicked off the tab actually.
You did?
I actually when you're telling stories, I like looking at you when you tell these
Really?
stories. I don't know why. Yeah, the pictures are great, so definitely check them out, creepers. But when I'm like receiving a story, I realize I like watching you tell it a lot.
Okay. Well, perfect. Well, I can tell you what Cheryl looks like. She's got pigtails like Pippi Longstocking. She's
Hell yeah, she
she's
does. That's a dog with a bone.
she's just a dog with a bone. And yeah, creepers, I mean, check her out. She certainly looks like a character, but Cheryl had her suspicions about Mike's body even existing in that lake. And if you ever listen to
Mhm.
interviews of Cheryl, which I encourage you to, she is like this badass Southern woman. She's got this super thick accent, and she just kind of describes what it's like to have people call you nuts and like for police and actually people in town to tell her, like, "Let sleeping dogs lie," like, she goes, "No, there's something wrong here. We don't have a body, and my son's waiters are completely untouched, like, something's off." And so she really takes it upon herself to keep Mike's case alive, and she, first appealed to local news stations, and they didn't wanna take this on, so
Mm.
she took it upon herself to go ahead and start taking out ads in local newspapers, even billboards at one point, and these were very expensive for her because she came from a very humble background. She was working at a daycare at this point, and I'm not quite sure how old she was, like, when she was doing all of this, but I think she was in her at least when all this initial investigation started, she was definitely in her, I think, like, early 70s.
Oh wow.
So this was a lot for her to have to do on her own, and she ends up taking out a $1,200 page ad in, uh, the Tallahassee Democrat, which is a big publication down in Tallahassee, and it certainly helped her. And that coupled with she had written something like 2,600 letters to the Florida governor, like wrote him almost every single day for
Wow.
years, trying to get some attention on Mike's case. And she also would stand outside of churches and protest, which she said, I realize now in hindsight, everybody definitely thought I was nuts, but she really didn't care. She was like, I know people think of me as this crazy lady with pigtails, but, you know, in the most shocking twist, police actually didn't think Cheryl was nuts. And they ended up getting in touch with Cheryl and they said, we actually think you might be onto something here. And we're going to put you in touch with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, which is actually a state agency. And she ends up meeting with an agent named Will Mickler and he agrees to take the case on himself. And this was just around like 2004, so about 4 years after Mike's
Mm, okay.
gone. And finally, after campaigning for years, she was really going to be taken seriously. And I know I said this in the top line, but had she not kept up with that kind of persistence, the discoveries that I'm about to unpack with you, I don't think would have ever been made. Like, is she a character?
Oh, I'm
For
sure.
sure. But I mean, she really fought and fought hard and it paid off, not to give too much away, but just want to pause there. I wish there was a picture of Cheryl because I wish I kind of just want to drop you one, can I?
I mean, you can. Yeah, if you give me her full name, I could just Google her.
Uh Here, wait. Cuz I think you're just going to have a vibe.
Okay.
Um and I
I
just
wonder
want to
how
get
many cases are similar to that where there is like one family member who does sniff that something's suspicious, but they're kind of discounted from the conversation because they're eccentric or they
yeah.
present as eccentric. I wonder how often there's something about that specific dynamic of like the kooky family member who's kind of edged out of the conversation because they look the way they look, but they're really talking about some real stuff going on.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. She I mean, I literally saw words used about her that were like crackpot. Like she just kind of has she didn't do herself, I don't think, many favors by like going to public places and kind of causing a ruckus, but
Mhm.
um I don't know if you've
I
got a picture of her.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, sh
Yeah.
this is kind of exactly what I imagined. Sweetheart. She seems so
Yeah.
sweet.
Yeah, yeah,
Because
yeah.
2 things can be true. I mean, she might generally just be maybe a little bit more of an eccentric personality, but it doesn't mean that she can't tell right from wrong or tell that something strange might have happened to her child, you know?
Exactly. Mother's
People will just
intuition.
weaponize her appearance against her to
Yeah.
do anything other than their goddamn jobs.
Exactly. Well,
Again, this is spike number 1 of the blood pressure. I actually got told I have high blood pressure recently. Actually,
oh my god. It's
like that.
definitely from this for going on like 4 years for you now.
It might just be Tor, I don't know.
It might be Tor. It might be Tor, baby. But I will say one of the people that is gonna spike your blood pressure, and one of the people that thought that Cheryl was just causing a ruckus for no reason was Denise, Mike's widow. She really did not appreciate what Cheryl was doing, and she thought
I'm sure she did not.
yeah, 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 and she thought that it was basically putting thoughts in her daughter's head that her dad was going to come back someday, even though she had made it very clear to Ansley, she was like, "Daddy is probably not coming back. The likelihood of that is very small." And I saw that
Mhm.
Cheryl said, "I never said anything like that to Ansley." Who knows? But, Cheryl remained pretty adamant that she would never use that kind of language around her granddaughter. But Denise makes it clear that, if she keeps this up, that Cheryl is never going to see her granddaughter again. And she ends up cutting off ties between her and Ansley. And that actually happened for years. They were estranged from each other.
Oh,
And again,
wow.
this is all sort of in that time frame of 2004 to about 2007, which I sort of labeled in my research. I'm like the era of Cheryl. Like this was really her time.
Mhm.
And it's also sort of the era where everything I'm about to share with you starts to really go down. So obviously with Mike's death in 2000, Denise mourns for a while and then she decides to start dating again. And actually Denise ends up dating someone I don't think you would expect, but maybe you would. She starts
Me?
dating mhm.
You think I wouldn't expect it?
Well, I'm just curious if you have already put 2 and 2 together, but she ends up dating Brian Winchester, her now dead husband's best friend.
I'm shocked.
So it's not like we've ever seen this before in a true crime
I was
case,
gonna say.
but I know. But this is his friend that had been there from day one throughout all the search efforts. And he was also married to Denise's good friend, Kathy. Let me just clarify that too, that he and Kathy had started to have trouble. And so at this point, when they started dating, he and Kathy were still not even initially divorced.
Just, like,
So
separated or something?
just, like, separated, yeah. So it's, like, weird feels like high school drama, like, speaking of them all being high school friends. I mean, this is a very twisted web here.
Mhm, and to
Just think
clarify,
of
he was also the insurance broker.
yes. You're like, "Baby, let me take over."
You set
There
it
will
up.
be I know. But, of course, it didn't take long for Cheryl and Silas Dean and some of Mike's friends to start raising their eyebrows, um, and the rumor mill started. They said, they just said basically everything you said. Wasn't he the insurance broker? Were they in cahoots? Like, were they dating before this? And so everybody is starting to point to Denise and Brian, wondering if they knew more about Mike's disappearance. And they ended up getting married in 2005,
They got
and
married?
they got married.
Oh, damn.
Yeah, and they ended up moving in together in Mike's, old home with Denise, and one of the first things that Cheryl was like, obviously, she already thought that things were off, but she was like, he
Mhm.
went in and I don't know, I've seen this in personal relationships in my life too, but someone that kind of over assumes, like, steps into someone's place and is immediately like, "I'm Ansley's father now," in a way that feels inauthentic. Like, that was something that Cheryl noticed very quickly, that, like, Ansley was sort
Mhm.
of hesitant for him to come in as hard as he did. So that was just sort of, I guess, this whole dynamic was like the nail in the coffin for Cheryl. And she actually started keeping a detailed notebook surrounding like everything about her son's disappearance, really playing detective here. But
Mhm.
she also kept like different logs about memories that she recalled about Brian and Denise's relationship, like even while Mike was alive,
Oh my god.
just like how they would interact with each other and things that she thought were off, but she never
Yeah.
sort of clocked. And now in the context. So um, at this point, from what I read, the FDLE, the Florida law enforcement, the State Department, that had
These
the
acronym
State Department.
departments are
I know,
crazy.
I know.
You're like the
Like FDLE,
FCCP2.
FWCC. um, but they had been supporting Cheryl, but nothing throughout the years was really new was coming out about this investigation.
Mhm.
And they didn't really silence her, but at this point they said, when something comes up, we'll call you. And they had reportedly just sort of stopped returning a lot of her phone calls. And it wasn't until, they got married, Denise and Brian, that Cheryl calls them back and she says, "Listen, I feel like I've got more information here. I know you guys are tired of hearing me talk about this, but if I could just talk to someone else, I think I've got more to contribute." And so they say, okay. And they end up putting her in touch with a new detective named Mike Devaney. And she shares with Mike this journal of hers and all these memories she has about Brian and Denise. And she tips him off in the direction that truly kicks the entire unearthing of what really happened here. Which, of course, points back to Brian being the life insurance policy broker because Cheryl obviously had put that together and she says, "I think there's a connection there that y'all should probably investigate." And Mike says, "Huh, okay, let's investigate how much the policy was that Brian helped Mike take out." And it was $1.75 million. And yeah.
Okay.
And then
It's a
it's
big
uncovered.
policy for someone who's in their early 30s.
Exactly, a very big policy. And it's uncovered that right after that, uh, then that is uncovered right after Mike's waiters had surfaced that, Denise had swiftly started working with Brian to file the claim against that life insurance policy, which, is of course the logical thing to do after someone's death certificate is issued. But essentially, what she was trying to say is that not only did Brian get my son's wife because she thought he had been lusting after her for years, but he kind
Mhm.
of got the two for one special here because he not only got her, but a very large chunk of money in the process, she was assuming, had he and Denise, if there was something there where they had kind of finagled that. Um, but again, this is just totally speculative. But FDLE did take the tip seriously.
Good.
But Yeah, which was great, but they said, "Listen, we have got to play our cards right here because that's not proof of anything." And mostly because Cheryl was just really pushing and, they said, "Your persona right now, the way it's being received in, like, the court of public opinion isn't that great, so just trust us." And they basically advised Cheryl to just keep a low profile, don't say
Mhm.
anything about the insurance policy, and, if these 2 are who we and you think they are, something is gonna come out about this because
Right.
it just has to happen. And it did in 2012, 7 years into their marriage, Denise and Brian's relationship started to crack. I also just wanna pause there. I need to know, like, how fast you clocked that Brian might have been like, when did you first get an inkling?
The second you mentioned him.
Really? I
Well, to be fair, you did set this up to say there is a love triangle and infidelity, and I was
That's
like,
true.
"Understand," and then you
Right, right,
said,
right.
"Now the best friend," and I said, "Understand."
Understand, I know. This is kinda set up a little bit like a Law& and Order SVU episode
A
where I
little
think
bit, yeah.
I've told you this, but, like, the person that comes up first is all this is my dad's advice, but he's like, "It's always the first person." Like, he used to always walk in a room
He's kinda right.
anytime, and he was like, "It's that person, whoever's on screen first."
In a Law& and Order SVU episode, if it's not a reoccurring character, always distrust the main character of the
Yeah.
episode. Something
Oh,
has gone
yeah.
wrong.
Truth. Well, yeah, so their relationship had started to crack, and it's from my understanding that Denise was really the one that started to fall out of love with Brian, and Brian was very, I would say, obsessed with Denise. He was not happy that she was filing for divorce, and this back and forth they ended up having, which was just kinda like making up, breaking up for the next several
Yeah,
years.
yeah. What year did you
Um,
say this was again? That they
this
divorced? You mentioned I think you said
this would be
2000.
2012.
Right, okay. So,
Yeah.
there's a lot of time that's passed since his disappearance, I guess.
Yeah, 12 years. And also, their divorce wouldn't even be finalized until 2016. So they did this dance of like making up, breaking up for about 4 years. If that tells you anything about, their ties with each other. Um, and it's only because really something happens in 2016 that pushes Denise to officially call it quits. So this is where it actually gets kind of nuts. I don't think you're going to anticipate this.
Okay,
Um,
okay.
in August of 2016, Denise got in her car to go to work that day, and it was unclear to me from the research if they were still living under the same roof. From what I read, my feeling was that they were not. Um, but either way, Brian had broken into her car and he was hiding in the back seat while she was like getting ready to go to work, waiting for her to get in. And she turns on the ignition and he puts a gun right up to her side and he says, "You better drive."
Oh my god.
And and she does. And she ends up pulling her car into a parking lot where she basically convinces him after like a couple of hours of talking to let her go. And during that conversation, he said he was going to kill himself if she ended up seriously going through with the divorce. And she spends, 2 hours with him basically talking him down, and she says, "Listen, I won't, and on top of that, I promise you, I will not go to the police. I will not tell them about this. I love you. It's gonna be okay." And Brian does end up letting her go. But what does she do? Quickly beelines to the police and tells them about her abduction. And she gets brought in for questioning. And the thing was, police, yes, of course, they're, interested in hearing about this abduction and what the hell is going on. But they were actually way more interested in trying to tap Denise for information while she's going to be in this kind of vulnerable state about Mike Williams' death, those
Mhm.
16 years ago. And so she's kind of reliving the entire day with about her abduction in this interrogation room. Little did she know, though, they've actually got another police officer in the adjoining room who's briefed on her case, who is listening into everything that's happening. And Denise ends up revealing that she had actually saw in, like, I guess Brian had brought it into the car that he had tarp and bleach, like when she initially looked in the back seat. And
Tarp and bleach?
tarp and bleach, and police really use this as ammo to enter into a conversation about Mike by saying, "You do realize he actually had plans to kill you if he had tarp and bleach in the back seat. We don't think you're understanding that his intention might not have ever been to kill himself. It might have just been to kill you."
Mhm.
And, this really puts her in a vulnerable state. She gets like that revelation kind of happens for her right in this interrogation room, and she ends up getting really upset and vulnerable. You can actually hear this. They do have a
What did you
recording
think the
of it.
tarp and bleach were for? Maybe did it not cross
I
her
just don't
mind?
think it registered. I don't think it registered for her at first because it was just like such heightened circumstance,
Mhm.
and her trying to like talk him down. Or maybe she just I don't know. Maybe I honestly have no idea how it didn't register for her until she got in that room. Maybe just the coming down and remembering everything that happened. She might have even clocked it, like, when she was in that room recalling. Um, but
Mm.
you can tell when they start talking about it and really hammer home, "You're lucky to be alive." She's really starting to get upset, starts crying, and they decide that this is the moment that they're gonna strike, and this is their opportunity. They're gonna start really pressing her for with questions about Mike. And they say, "We think that Brian was going to do away with you just like he did with Mike," which was kind of a bold sentence for them to say to her. But they say, "Do you know who it is that you really married after your husband died?" And they're playing this card of trying to sympathize with her and say, like, none of this is your fault. And
Mhm.
they were thrilled because previously they had tried to get Brian and Denise to come in and sit down, and they had hired attorneys immediately. They had never been willing to talk about Mike Williams' death. So, they had waited all of these years to have this moment. And Denise, as they start going into this conversation about Mike, she changes and she starts to go kind of silent and she's taking all this in. And they press her and they say, "Do you think that Mike really died on that lake?" And she says, "Yeah, I do." And they say, "Well, why?" And she says, "I don't know. I've just always believed that." And then she starts to do something weird, which they notice. She starts to steer the conversation right back towards the kidnapping. And she says, "You know what? I don't really want to talk about that. I'm just seeking justice for what happened to me today. And, talking about that gets me really upset. And it doesn't have anything to do with what we're talking about." And they just sort of have the instinct. They're like, "Okay, here we go." And they decide to switch their strategy and play bad cop. And they say, "Well, listen, Brian's in the other room and we're going to question him too. And if he says something different than you and you're sitting here and you've remained silent, just know it might not turn out well for you." And this is pretty like compelling if you ever like watch this recording, but she kind of just sits there like thinking. And then she says, "That's fine. I don't feel comfortable talking about this right now. It's not what I'm here for. So you talk to him and that'll just be what it is." And she just sort of like leaves it up to fate. Now, I don't know from my research exactly what was said behind closed doors with Brian, but I
Oh, did they
think
actually have him in the other room?
yeah. Yeah, yeah,
Oh, they
yeah.
did? Oh, I wasn't
Yeah.
sure if that was a bluff or not because you said they were playing bad
They
cop, so I was like, sometimes they'll
yeah.
straight up lie.
No, they didn't I don't know if he wasn't in the room where, like, he could hear in to anything
No,
Denise
but
was
they
saying.
had him in, like, custody or something.
Yes, they had him in custody, and they were
Gotcha.
going to question him that day. And I think what was said behind closed doors was an awful lot, and I'm going to unpack how it all unravels and what I think he might have said. But what comes out of this particular instance is that Brian is charged with the kidnapping and he ends up pleading not guilty. But then a year later, he actually changes his plea to no contest, which would mean they may or may not actually have to go to court for this. But Denise ends up pleading with the judge and says, "Brian is not going to stop. Like, my life is going to continue to be in danger as long as he is not behind bars." And so they actually do end up going to court, and Brian is sentenced to 20 years in prison. But keep in mind that the Mike Williams of it all continues to remain completely kind of compartmentalized still. This kidnapping trial has nothing to do with Mike.
Mhm.
But all of that is about to change because the literal day after Brian is sentenced, a body is discovered. So
Whoa.
let me just ask you, did you sense the whole like kidnapping thing coming?
No. No, I did not. That was a bit shocking.
Yeah.
I suppose, like, because I'm assuming this is some kind of a pack operation, but I wasn't even sure if it was that in the beginning because I've also seen scenarios where, like, the best friend does something to harm the husband who goes missing and then sweeps into the grieving wife and like she's
Yeah.
oblivious to like any of it happening. This sounds more like they were in cahoots with each other the entire time. But all good things kind of come to an end in some way where like somebody crashes out and then a relationship falls apart and then somebody starts talking or something like what you're saying, a body surfaces nearly 20 years after the fact.
Yeah. When I was doing the research, I was like, "Wait, hold on. Let me make sure I've got my timeline straight. Like, when was his body found?" And I was like 17 years later, not only finding a body 17 years later, but keeping, like you said, keeping a secret for, honestly, at that point, it had been 20 years because their
Oh.
relationship had started like prior to Mike's disappearance. They had already
Mhm.
been having, flirtations or whatever. So,
Really?
like, yeah, like 3 years prior, I think, to Mike's disappearance. So they, for 20 years, had been keeping up this act. I mean, I won't get ahead of myself, but yeah, it's all about to come crashing down.
What are the
Um,
chances of that too on like the literal day or day after his sentencing?
yes.
That's when it
Yeah.
happens?
Yeah. Well, the chances might be higher than you think based on what he might have said behind closed doors. So,
Ooh.
police end up finding Mike Williams' body about 50 miles away in Tallahassee, Florida, 50 miles away from Lake Seminole, buried in a shallow grave by another lake, which was actually, this
Oh.
was really sad. It was actually just a couple of miles away from where Mike was born and raised, like 5 miles from his childhood home. And Cheryl, his mom, is, of course, distraught, and she sort of, like, denies it at first, which I thought was kinda funny because she had been searching for so much closure and justice, but, um, she eventually does, DNA testing so that they can corroborate that this is, in fact, Mike Williams, and they do confirm
Mhm.
this, and they alert Denise, and Denise is completely devastated. That's what the officer that told her described it as. He was like, "Oh my god," she was, just, like, sobbing, like, dry heaving. It was awful. But police intentionally keep how they found the body pretty close to the chest. She's asking, what did he look like? What's the condition? Obviously, 17 years later, it's just like bones at that point. But, what was found with him. And they had suspicions of foul play, but they didn't want to tip off anything while they were still dealing with this whole like Denise Bryan mess. And then it all changes about 5 months later when Denise Williams would be escorted off of the Florida State University campus where she worked, and I actually do have a picture of it in the Canva doc, like, her getting taken off campus, but,
Oh, which
um
page should I go to? I haven't
I think it's
scrolled.
on the second. No, you're good. Well, I know you're not, if you don't have them, that's totally fine. If you'd rather look at me, but
No,
she's
I got him pulled up. I got him pulled
okay.
up now.
Yeah, she's basically being, escorted off of the campus, and she is arrested for the first-degree murder of Mike Williams 17 years after his initial disappearance. And
Wait, why was she teaching a teacher?
I
Did
don't
I
think she
miss
was a
that?
teacher. I think she
Oh.
worked in an administrative office. She was
Oh,
not a
gotcha.
professor or anything. I think she just worked at the actual campus. Um,
Gotcha.
but police had reason to believe that Denise had orchestrated Mike's murder with the help of Brian Winchester. Who would have thunk? And this is all because she didn't heed police advice, I should say, when she was being interrogated that day after her kidnapping, which is sort of haunting to think back to that. Had she actually come clean, a lot of this could have or not even come clean, just shared more instead of remaining completely silent. She could have had a lot more leverage here, because Brian did come clean that day. He ended up orchestrating a deal with the FDLE that he knew more about Mike Williams' death. And they essentially said, if you give us the full story and you take the stand against Denise Williams, we will lessen your sentence. So he only got 20 years for the kidnapping of Denise, and then he was completely immune from facing any sort of murder charges in the case of Mike Williams. Um, and he,
Interesting.
yeah, which is pretty wild. I was like, I can't. It's kind of insane to think that law enforcement can do that. I mean, I saw one officer said it was a deal with the devil. Like, it was
Mhm.
awful. We knew that while we were doing it, but we really had no choice. Um, in 2018, Denise's murder trial actually began, And if convicted, she was going to be facing a mandatory life sentence. And the prosecution was obviously going to come in guns blazing. And specifically, I love this. They were going to bring in Cheryl as a witness, Mike's mom.
Mhm.
They were going to bring in Brian's first wife, Kathy, which I feel like Kathy, I know she's kind of like off to the side in this case, but I think she's such an interesting player because she must have known too something that was going on back then. And
Maybe, yeah.
right. Yeah. So I ended up just digging a little bit. I didn't wanna, like, go too far down the, like, rabbit hole with Kathy, but, she ends up stating that she always kinda had a feeling that they had a flirtation and a weird vibe,
Oh,
and
did she?
yes, and she
She caught
said
vibes.
yes, she got vibes, and I read this and I was like, but she said that the idea first came to mind. She remembered that Brian had kinda, like, jokingly suggested that they have a threesome at someone's beach house, and I was like, "Huh, yeah, 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 might pay attention to that," but she also was kinda like, "Maybe he's just, being funny," like, I think some drinks were involved, but that was the first thing that she thought about, and then this was unclear to me, and so creepers forgive me, but I did see somewhere else in the research when I was going down my Kathy track that, like, there might have been photographs shown in court of the 3 of them together in, like, a weird way, so I don't the something might have actually happened with them having a threesome. I'm not exactly sure, and I wasn't able to find much more information about that, so if I am able to, I will let you know,
Yeah, I mean, it
but
could've maybe it was just casual because the 2 guys were best friends, so I'm sure at some point, like, all 4 of them, like, the wives, when they were all still married, must have hung out at some point. Had drinks together, maybe?
yeah, but I think the thing that I thought was weird was that I read somewhere that, like, photographs might have been shown in the courtroom that I couldn't find, like
Just, like, suggestive
like
photographs of,
suggestive
like, look
photographs. Yeah.
interesting. I mean,
So
yeah, tricky to say because like, it could have been something casual where, like, maybe all 4 of them, but then just those 3, like,
I think it was just those 3.
happened to get captured in a picture,
Mhm.
and then the prosecution is gonna spin that up into, like, another narrative.
Right, right.
It could have been a real it could have been true. It could have been something that was
It could
going
have been
down.
true, that's the other thing. I mean, it could have been true, and people have threesomes, all the time. So, but I guess I just wanted to mention it because I think it was pretty clear. I mean, Kathy knew there was a sexual attraction there between him and Denise, even when she was married to him.
Mhm.
Um, but nothing was more compelling than the testimony that Brian Winchester would give on the stand, which was essentially an entire confession of what went down the morning of December
Shut
16th,
up, on the
2000.
stand he did it?
It is so I should have brought you the audio. He gave an entire confession on the stand, and it's so haunting. And I will break it down here, but hearing it come out of his mouth is like, you cannot believe that he's doing it in real time. Because he goes into complete detail. But this
Was Denise in
is
the room? She probably wasn't in the
Denise.
courthouse for this.
No, Denise was in the room. Denise did not take the stand. Yeah. Um,
That must have been so crazy for
I
her.
know, I know, because, like, it's so crazy, and it's just so crazy to think about because it's a small enough town, and these 2, like, high school couples not high school, I mean, they're older now, but, like, that they've known each other that long. It's
Yeah,
all
long history.
intertwined. Yeah, long history. It's very juicy, and, but it was gonna be a really interesting game because with Brian's confession, it's sort of a risk for the prosecution because if the jury doesn't buy Brian's confession in, its totality, or if they or even worse, if, like, they don't really particularly like him or empathize with him, um, Denise could walk free. I mean, it's kinda hard for a jury to empathize with someone that's responsible for conspiring in a murder and much more, which is what I'm gonna, tell you about with his full confession, but I had to mention that. That is very interesting to think about. It's kinda because I thought I was like, "Okay, well, slam dunk," but no, I mean, it could swing the other way.
Hmm.
Um, so the confession. Brian says that he always had a connection with Denise and that they actually secretly had been having an affair for 3 years, prior to Mike's disappearance. So they were together since 1997. And he
Ooh, okay.
described that they had a very hot and heavy love affair. He said, quote, "We just connected like nobody else, and we got really good at hiding things. Denise is a very smart person." So much so that within their first 2 years of their affair, they had actually begun plotting the quote accident that was going to happen to Mike on Lake Seminole. And this is It's infuriating and also so nuts, but it did kind of remind me of Amy Allwine. But the two of them said that because they were so religious, so devout in their faith.
Forgot all about that, the religious component.
Yes.
This is
Well, and
crazy.
it's crazy, and it plays
They're
such a
gonna
huge
piss me
part.
off. Like,
Oh, you're about to lose your mind, like, because I almost lost my mind when
I
I was like,
can't take these cases where there's, like, a
I
religious
know.
undertone where they're like, "Well, we're devout," and I'm like, "Devout to my ass,
Well, get ready.
101." Like,
No, I know this because this one is like egregious. I mean, obviously with Amy Allwine, terrible and egregious, but the two of these effers, you're gonna be like, oh my God. So they basically say, we're just so devout in our faith that when we started conspiring for murder, by the way, when we started conspiring together, we just thought this is really we can't get divorced and we just got to chalk this up to God and we have to see, what will happen once Mike has his quote accident. They're very adamant about labeling this as an accident. They just sort of believed.
I'm so mad. I'm
I'm like, I
so
need to
mad.
look at you. I need to
I'm,
look away
like,
from my research.
fuming. I'm literally
I
holding my
know.
chest to try to calm my heart down. I'm so
I know.
angry
I
about
know. I'm like,
this.
we need a blood pressure monitor on you. I,
God.
I
We should sell
know.
those for merch, by the way.
We should
I think they're
blown
very
away,
expensive.
blown out, blown away.
Whew.
Um, but yeah, they've said, whatever happens, happens basically once Mike has his accident. And Brian pushes on and says that that morning, Mike had not gone alone out on that lake. He actually met up with him and like they had planned that together ahead of time and they took off from the boat. And his plan all along was to make it look like Mike had drowned and he and Denise had come up, they had decided prior that the waiters were really going to be the like murder weapon in this case. And so when Mike had basically gotten to the edge of the boat, Brian pushed him overboard and it was in an area that Brian was pretty sure was deep. And then this is very chilling for me actually. Like I can hear him saying this in my head. He said he basically drove the boat away and he looks back to see Mike to hopefully see him drowning. And Mike was smart enough to start taking off his waders and his jacket immediately. And so Brian's looking at him like, oh my God, like he's gonna maybe survive this. Like, what am I gonna do? And Mike, not only does he immediately take everything off, he starts swimming over to a nearby stump because it's like these orchard waters where there's all
Mhm.
these like little stumps that are out of the ground. So he ends up holding and clinging for dear life. And this is when Brian is like, oh shoot, like this whole accident plan is gonna completely crumble. And
Mhm.
for him, it's a huge, like obviously his moral compass is messed up, but
It pushed the
this
guy off a
is
boat, like, with the intent to
yeah,
kill.
yes, but he's having to this is the moment. I mean, he has either got to finish the job or is he and he kind of talks about this. It's like a moment of am I going to try to fix this? Like am I going to try to not go the route that I really don't want to go? Um And at this point, Mike had started to scream. He was, hoping to attract other people that might be out on the lake to come and help him. Which can you imagine that? Just like the full betrayal moment that Mike was having where he's like holding on to that and watching his friend that he knows just tried to kill him, like circling in the water.
I can't even imagine if he was thinking about that. Like, I wonder, like, what goes through your mind when you're in survival mode. Like,
Yeah.
a thing has just happened to you. You're in the water, trying to get your jacket off, trying to get these waders off, trying to cling on to something.
There's something about the image of that that is just like so haunting to me. But yeah, so he's watching Brian kind of circle around a bit, and then Brian had actually brought his gun, I guess, just in case, and he loaded it up. And then once he got close enough to Mike, he shot him right in the head. And after he was sure he was dead, which the autopsy did reveal that he would have died pretty much instantly. Which I guess if there is a silver lining there, I don't think Mike was in pain. And he ends up pulling Mike into the boat and taking him to shore. And he puts Mike in his car, apparently in a dog crate he had in the back of his car, and then
Oof.
went back out. He pushed the boat back out off the ramp into the water, and then drove all the way back to Tallahassee, where he buried Mike. And then he ends up getting a call from his own father, Brian's father, uh, who is sobbing. And he's like, "Oh my God, Mike Williams has gone missing," which this is also, I think, just like such a dark and twisted element of this. And he gets so emotional at this part during the confession. But he says, Mike was extremely close with my dad, because Mike had always sort of been that friend that would come over when we were little. And he was sort of like the kid that every parent wanted their kid to be friends with. He was just a really good kid and had always been really close with Brian's dad. So imagine being Brian, knowing in that moment that I'm responsible for this and my own dad is calling me to tell me that this guy I've grown up with is gone and I'm the one that killed him just hours ago.
Mhm.
Um, so Brian added that he and Denise had, of course, planned the whole life insurance policy scheme and how they were going to file the claims after the waiters were discovered, which it was unclear to me. And I tried to look this up. I assume Brian might have planted those waiters. Had gone back into the river to get them, but I couldn't find that solidly stated anywhere if he was the
Mm.
one that put them back out there. I would assume so.
Maybe,
Um,
yeah, maybe after, like, he pulled the body up back into the boat, which it's
yeah,
crazy the boat wasn't given, like, a forensic sweep, I guess, or maybe he cleaned it very, very well or something, but
yeah,
it's it sounds like it was kinda messy the way this
yeah,
all went down, or kind of somewhat unplanned the way that it all actually turned out. He had hoped that he would have fallen off and drowned,
yeah,
and that wasn't the case.
yeah. But I would like to know if he was the one that, because I was thinking to myself, I'm like, God, he must have had to go back and find where go like, try to find in the boat, like, where Mike had it might have not been as hard as I'm thinking it was, but to find where he had actually taken everything off and grab it so that they wouldn't be discovered until he needed them to, but,
Mhm.
um, anyways, he said that for the next 16 years, he and Denise kept a, quote, "mafia-like oath of silence." So, Brian has just given incredibly compelling testimony, but is it going to be enough to convict Denise? Because the defense had an idea of how they were gonna play this game. They basically try to spin everything that Brian is saying, and they paint him as this, like, uber obsessed, borderline stalker ex-husband of Denise's, which, of course, is, like, kidnapping case did not help that, but,
Mhm.
they also kinda point out, he's very sexually deviant. They accuse him of being a sex addict. They're basically just trying to do everything they can so that the jury sees that the only reason that Brian ever came clean about this was to save his own you know what, and that he was actually the one that killed Mike. They also point out that this whole, like, guilty conscience act isn't working. They say, it wasn't until August of 2016 when you were charged for kidnapping Denise that you even, decided to come clean because he had been saying, these thoughts had been lingering in my head for years. He was really kind of like
Mhm.
amping that up. And they also revealed some information that as a juror, I probably would have been shocked to hear, but they said that while he was waiting for his kidnapping sentence, he offered an inmate in jail to put a hit out on Denise and also to get others to lie for him about that. And I don't know how exactly they got that information, but Brian ends up saying it's absolutely not true. I actually, well, he says, I did have somebody come up to me in jail and say, "Hey, if you want my help, I can make that all go away for you." But I did not entertain it. But it does come to light that Brian had been attempting to contact people that might lie for him on the stand during the kidnapping trial in order to make him look better.
Mhm.
So it's this weird line of like, he didn't actually ever try to have Denise killed, but he definitely was trying to come up with ways to tamper with witnesses in his kidnapping case. So that was certainly something I don't think the prosecution saw coming. Um, and when police got wind of this and they questioned Brian, this was when his guilty conscience took over. He was painted into a corner basically, or I guess backed up into a corner with the witness tampering, and he was also just ready, I guess, to come clean about everything, and he couldn't take it anymore, and of course, the reduced sentence probably sounded nice. So, let me just clarify what I was just saying is, like, this would have been in a time where they're having multiple rounds of questioning before he's actually gonna take the stand
Mhm.
for the kidnapping trial, and police are basically saying, "Okay, we've been hearing that you're trying to tamper with witnesses' statements, like prepping them prior to the trial. You can't do that." And
Mhm.
also, do you want to tell us about Mike? And that's sort of when Brian was like, oh, shoot, I'm just going to come clean because I want to reduce sentence. So, of course, the lines are very blurred here because Denise obviously still knew about Mike's death, but that day she hadn't planned for him to be shot in the head. She thought that he was going to die from a drowning, which or her the accident, which I guess in her mind made her feel less guilty. And Brian ends up saying that, I tried to sit Denise down and tell her exactly how everything went down that day, and she just refused to let me tell her the details. And the defense do their best to nail him towards the end of this case. They make him state that he is a liar. And in their closing remarks, they really try to sway the jury and say, he's just told you flat out that he's a liar. And how do you know that the story he's telling is true about, the day that Mike Williams went missing? Um, yeah, it just,
It was like, well, Mike Williams is found.
yeah,
Body does seem to have a gunshot wound in the skull.
exactly.
Nobody seems to be responsible for it except for this guy.
Exactly. Well, and they say, the only, person that really killed Mike Williams is Brian Winchester, not my
Mhm,
client.
mhm.
Uh, and the prosecution, in their closing remarks, end up turning to the jury, and they say that the only person this is actually kind of juicy too, but the only person in this courtroom that sat here completely stone faced, not shedding a single tear during Brian Winchester's incredibly compelling testimony was this person, and they point to Denise because she really was like stone cold during his entire confession.
Mhm.
And they basically say, this woman is not who she claims to be. She's not this like loving, devout wife. She's just as guilty as Brian in the death of her husband. She is also a murderer. So this is going to be tough for the jury. And they ended up deliberating for 8 hours. And I'm just curious what you think the outcome was. Like if you were on that jury, what would your thoughts be?
Well, I'm a different kind of juror.
I know, but I'm curious. I'm curious because
I was like, "Lock them all up."
as I was
Um,
reading that, I was like, man, this is tough.
it is tough. It just depends. It would depend how good of a performance there was on either side of, like, the aisle in terms of legal teams, because I can see how somebody could paint a very clear picture on either side, truthfully, if they were like, if you look at all the facts on paper, this is the only man, the only person responsible for his murder.
Mhm,
So she's not culpable in anything. We can't even prove that she was knowing. And as we've seen from his behavior, from how he abducted her and tried to kill her, who's to say that he's anything other than just volatile, dangerous, and a compulsive liar? And I don't know how weighty the other side of that is to say, like, the only person in this room who has not shed a tear and feels nothing for this case and her dead husband is the former wife.
mhm.
I can see how they could I can see this in my mind, how they would have
Yeah.
painted this, but me personally, yes, I would have absolutely locked them both up. Because the smoking gun in all of it is the conversation around the conspiracy of life insurance, in
Mhm,
my opinion.
mhm. Yeah,
That tells me that she knew from the get-go what was going on, what the plan was, and she benefited off of it.
yes. And I guess what I also was just thinking is really what would make it tough as a juror is that that Brian Winchester he's immune. He has immunity. He's never going to be charged with the murder. So it's
Mhm.
like, do you go ahead and put this woman who clearly has some sort of ties to this, but doesn't actually have like the gun residue on her hands? Do
Mhm.
you put her behind bars just to seek justice for someone? Like it is like a moral dilemma. It is weird.
And
Um,
she's a co-conspirator in my mind, so yes.
yeah, yeah. Well, baby, you you guessed right. The verdict comes out guilty and Denise is found guilty on all counts. So this meant that Denise was going to end up serving a life sentence. Now, here's where things kind of get messed up. So Denise ends up filing an appeal and
Of course she does.
of course, and the first degree murder conviction is taken to the appeals court for of course like lack of evidence, and they have to go through another hearing, and many of the same witnesses from the first trial have to take the stand again, including Mike's mom, Cheryl, um, and who I read so much about her. She was just like, I just wanted justice. I just didn't care at this point. Like, I just wanted my son I wanted closure on this.
Mhm.
And so she was, but she was happy to take the stand again. But It
She
was
must be pretty old at
another.
this point at the
Yes.
time, like, this
Yeah.
trial is happening.
Yeah. Uh, but thankfully, Denise was found guilty again, although the judge ended up sentencing her to a much lesser charge on murder conspiracy. And for this, Denise will only serve 30 years in prison. So I feel like this case, I know I set it up in a way where it's like you kind of know what's coming, but I feel like it's just such a good testimony to like what it means to persevere and not just let someone tell you that something is what it is and you should just let it be. Because like
Mhm.
Cheryl is the hero in this entire story. Like she's the one that really got her son justice after his death.
Truth and it's amazing that she sort of kept the mental fortitude through her own grief to keep doing it year after year because it sounds like through the process she didn't receive a lot of personal or law enforcement style support all that much. I mean, there were only a few blips in the story that you mentioned where police really took her seriously and she was looked at as somebody who had information or a valid perspective as opposed to just being an eccentric grieving mother.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I didn't even really think about it until you just said it, but she was really like getting up there in age. She had to spend the last like, I mean, I actually don't know if she's still alive, but she had to spend quite a large chunk of her older years in life fighting a battle, dealing with
Yeah.
a lot of, mental anguish with her family, with her granddaughter, all to hopefully get, the outcome that she thought that she didn't know, but she thought might be the case.
And in a time period where she probably there weren't shows like this, you know what I mean? Like, there
Yeah.
wasn't that kind of you had support from the media or you didn't. And it sounds like in large part she did not have a ton of consistent support from the media throughout the
Mhm.
full, like, 16 or 17-year duration of this absolute hell, but that's why, sort of radio shows or podcasts or small talk shows similar to these are useful for talking about these stories and for sort of lifting up a voice like Cheryl, who would otherwise just be seen as somebody who's not all there.
Yeah. I, uh, I know a couple of Cheryls in my life. I'm gonna dedicate this episode to Cheryl because I think she's a badass. I think she's
Yeah.
great, and, yeah,
I'm
she
happy that
she
she
was
lived to
really.
see the end of it and lived to see it through to some form of justice, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think she's like an inspiration for a ton of people that are dealing with, disappearances of friends and family every day. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, I think that's why I just wanted to bring this case because it really is just all about not stopping until if you have a feeling, if you have that intuition, especially if like mothers, a lot of mothers do to just keep going, keep following that path. Um, but yeah, that's
Yeah,
really.
it is so close to the Amy Allwine case too in some ways, and in the same sense of throughout the whole story, I kept thinking about their child. I just kept thinking about the idea of losing one parent to either what they thought was a tragic accident or later coming to terms when they're getting close to like adulthood or they were an adult murder, and then to
Mhm.
also lose your other parent, your mother, and realize she was the co-conspirator in your father's murder when you were a child.
I wonder how Ansley is doing. Like, because I really don't. Not only like is it sad because you realize this let me back up. It's already sad when this kinda comes out of nowhere, but to look back when you were a little kid growing up and think, "Oh my god, mom was having an affair with this man for years, even while dad was still alive, and conspiring against my dad while I'm, like, in under the same roof." It's so tragic.
Well, not even just that. The murderer moves into the house, and then you're calling him
Yes.
dad. He's your
Yeah.
stepdad.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
when we talk about the mental anguish that kid has gone through, that's the forgotten part of the story.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Like, I mean, she had to be at least 18 by the time this all went to trial and all of this was coming out, and I can't even imagine, like, what her young adult years must have been like going through that.
Yeah. Well, baby, that's really all. I mean, thankfully, this
Mm,
case is because a lot of the research I was reading, it was like from way back before they had ever found Mike. So thankfully, this case did see a solve, and I know we tend to do a lot of unsolved, but I just wanted to bring something that just compelled me that I thought was interesting, and
yeah.
yeah,
It's a bit of a different take for creep time. It's a
I
different
know
because yeah, we
it's a different
usually
vibe.
don't cover like a full scope, like I get you kinda tend to bring them actually, because same with Amy Allwine, like, you tend to bring,
Yeah,
like, the ones that are a full circle, like, this is a complete story.
yeah. I don't know what that says about me. I'm like, I need to know what the truth
Yeah.
actually is.
A lot of people who listen, I know Jen has said this before. She's like, I need cases with closure.
Yeah.
And I'm very much the opposite, where I'm like, I need nothing.
Yeah.
It's like, I need to know nothing so I can figure it out.
Oh my God. Yeah. But that's
No, that was
about it
juicy.
on yeah, that's the tragic death of Mike Williams. And actually no alligators were,
I
actually
did think that
involved.
towards the end as well. I was like,
Yeah.
and where did the alligator come into
And
play?
how are they doing?
Yeah.
I
Have you
love that
seen
alligators are on your algorithm.
not even just that video of the alligators hibernating, but also I saw a video, and I assume this was in Florida, of people tubing in like a river, but it was
Oh,
alligator infested. And
stop.
they were like panicking because they're like, we can't get out of the tube because if we splash, like something might happen. Like they're just tubing past alligators.
Oh my God.
Tubing.
Alligators are the ones you're supposed to like grab their snout, like they can't open.
If you think if I come face to face with an alligator, am gonna have the fortitude to go, clip, baby. Like I'm holding a Jimmy John's? What are you saying? What?
I just had a vision. I'm actually crying. I just had a vision of you and I in the Everglades
And I
on
go,
a
no.
boat ride. An alligator pops up and you go, and I just jump straight into the water and start like wrestling it.
Yeah, do a full like hook.
Oh my
I
God.
wouldn't know what to do, which is why
I
I
think
would
that's what you're supposed to
probably.
do. I think you're
Are
supposed to
you
grab its snout because they can't, there's something about their muscles where they can't open.
really?
Uh, yeah, where if there's enough pressure, they can't open their mouths.
But what happens when you gotta let go? Like how does that end?
And baby, you hold that Jimmy John sub till the end of time. I actually don't
I
know.
was gonna say, I was like, okay, so we get the snout closed, they can't open it. What next?
Yeah.
Dude, somebody call somebody to like.
Do you remember and I swear we'll wrap this, but like I think it's Pearl. There's a gator in the movie Pearl.
I've never watched the full movie of Pearl.
Oh my God. Wait, wait,
Never
wait.
watched it.
You've got to watch it because there's this whole bit where there's a gator that's like around. Oh, no, actually it's an X. It's in the first movie, the
I
first
was gonna say,
installment.
I was like, are they on a farm in Pearl?
They are on
I
a
was like,
farm,
what is the gator doing out there?
but there's a lake and there's a gator and her name is something. Wait, I gotta
Oh,
find this real quick because the name of the gator is incredible. Um,
the name of the
Gator name
gator.
and X.
I can't get over the Jimmy
Oh,
John's.
Theta, Theta,
Theta.
Theta, and they're like, should we feed her to Theta? Like it's, I just a
That's
gator named
frightening.
Theta.
I don't know how people that to me, like the gators in Florida are what I liken to like the spiders that are in Australia. I'm like, I don't know how people deal with that just being a thing that could be in and around this area.
Yeah.
Also saw something of recently in Arizona, a certain type of wild pig called like Valeria. I don't know what they're called. Some wild pig that like is dangerous. And
Like a
these
boar?
people, it's yeah, but it's not a boar. It looks like a boar though, but there's a
Okay.
certain type of name for it, and they're dangerous. And
Oh
these people were
shoot.
like out on their patio in like Arizona. There's a whole flock. I don't know what they're called when they're in a group of just these wild pigs, and they're like, stay calm, don't move, stay calm, and just make yourself a little bigger. Keep your eyes on them because they're really
In
dangerous.
Arizona.
Yes, yes.
Baby, why do you have pigs on your algorithm too? We have the
Wild
Discovery
pigs,
Channel
gators.
on. Yeah. I'm like, the cowboy hat that's on your hat right now. I'm like, there's something we got to
Hmm.
talk about. Oh my God.
I'm very interested.
That is so funny. Oh
Now that
my
I'm thinking, I do have
God.
a lot of animals on my feeds. They must know that I like watching animal videos.
I love that's just so funny that it's like two very I guess gators aren't like niche, but it's not something I would immediately expect to pop up on your algorithm.
Gators, wild
Gators.
pigs in Arizona, and parrots that dance. That's what I like.
You got
That's
one right
probably a good
here.
place to wrap.
I was gonna say, creepers, thank y'all so much for listening to another Friday
Yeah,
episode with us. Baby, thank you for listening to that. Thank you, even though you already
of
sleuthed it
course.
out,
We thoroughly
letting me
enjoyed
ride
it,
the
both of us.
blown out. And we will catch y'all on the next one. And with that, we'll
Yeah.
just say goodbye.
And good luck.
Bye, creepers.
Bye.